Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Live. We are live right now on the Cannabis community. Thank you for everyone that's joining us over there. And shout out to everyone that's subscribing to us on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/Cannabis, subscribe to our channel. We really could use your support over there. That's going to be the best place to keep in touch with the Cannabis team and what's coming up in the future. So follow us or subscribe, I guess is the terminology, over on YouTube, youtube.com/Cannabis. Make sure to hit us up over there and like and subscribe and all that good stuff. But today we are excited to be joined by Portal Provisions. He's joined us tonight to talk all about cannabis extracts with rosin in particular, but we're going to be talking about all sorts of things. And of course, I'm joined by JR Token, my co-founder here at Cannabis. He's done a lot of work behind the scenes to book our guests, but also put together our questions. So he'll be leading us a lot for most of the night. And then, of course, we're also going to be looking at our live chat. So if you're in the live chat, throw up some emojis, say hey. Looks like we already got a couple people in there. Shout out to the Inside Dope and Benjamin. What's up, guys? Thanks for joining us. So, JR, do you want to get us started with your first question?
Sure, excellent. Thanks for joining us, Nick. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no
Uh,
problem.
and so I guess we might as well get right at it and tell us about your cannabis journey and what kind of how you got started in the cannabis space and what's led you up to this moment in time.
Sure. I started smoking weed when I was in high school, like a lot of people, but when I moved to Colorado in 2012, it was it was pretty fast to where like legalization happened shortly after I moved there in mid 2012, and like I started trimming for someone. I had a knee surgery and I couldn't like do my normal job. So I started trimming for a friend of mine. And eventually I started running the trim crew, and then I was working in the garden and then running the garden. And I started growing weed in like 2013. And way back then, like maybe the second year, 2014 or something, was the first time I ever did like I blasted open tube BHO, and I had an across international vacuum oven and all those types of things, and like started doing that. Um, and I was in school at the time, like so I was paying my way through school with that as my job. And then eventually I went to work. I left cannabis and went into aerospace. I built electronics for spacecraft for like 5 years. And that whole time I was like kind of living this double life where I was still smoking weed, but not really telling anybody about it. And like I wasn't growing, but I missed growing. And eventually my same friend that I started growing with basically was like, called me up, was like, hey, do you want to do some consulting with me? And then eventually also like start a hemp farm. So I did weed consulting at the same time as having a security clearance. And then I quit that job to run a hemp farm in like 2019. And that was the year that the flood happened, where like everybody was growing hemp, the price bottomed out, all those types of things. And so after that, I kind of was like, well, I guess I'm going to go back to growing weed. Um, and I started growing in soil. The same friend like was a proponent of soil growing at this point in time, where we used to grow like back in the BHO days, it was cocoa and house and garden nutrients. And started on that like living soil journey, and it eventually evolved into much more. But in 2021, I was growing. I had a 30 light grow, and someone was processing my material into rosin, and selling it all for me and kind of doing that type of work. And a point came where he couldn't process the material that we had. And it was already in the freezer. Like it was cut down, it was frozen, and we were like waiting for him to pick it up type of vibes. And it just never really panned out. And then at the same time, we were like dealing with difficulties that summer, like infrastructure difficulties and things like that. And so we lost power for a little while. And the freezer thawed out and then refroze. So we had all this material now that like no hash maker would want to touch. And so basically, long story short, I started making hash. I had started like learning to wash with a friend. His name is the Cab Lab on Instagram. He let me like come and wash some stuff from my personal tent grow before I had the 30 lighter. And so I had the experience. I'd like made rosin before in a cold room and all those types of things. And so I was like, all right, cool. I guess I'll just build a cold room and like get an AC and a cool bot and do the installation, reverse osmosis water, like all of the things that you would need to like that I had seen other people that I knew making rosin at the time, whether it be the Cab Lab or Diet Funk or whomever. Like I was like, oh, this is how you do it. Like I've seen it on the Instagram, I've talked to people, whatever. And I just started doing it. And I had all this material that like was not prime, but I was able to make decent enough rosin out of it, like learn how to do it and like kind of sell some of that to recoup some expenses for a lower price and all that. And like there was no portal provisions, none of that type of stuff at that time. And so we kept growing and had another harvest and cut it all down. Now I had nice material, right? And I make rosin for the first time, like in my mind. And it's pretty good. But you know, the guys that I look up to a bunch and like see their products, it's not that good. Like in my head, I'm like, oh, if they made it, it would be better. So I found this class from this guy named Bird Extracts through Instagram. If you guys don't know Bird, he's won the Emerald Cup several times. He took second, third, and maybe a couple more places this past year in the traditional market category for like his Gush Mints and his Lemonhead Skittles is the one that he won with. And so he had a class on a farm in Northern California in Mendocino. And like I paid, I think it was like $900 at the time or something to go to this weekend class. And like I flew out to California with a jar of rosin that I had made. It was this Kush Mints. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna finally learn like what to do, like how to be good at this. And I got there and was just like, oh, hey, what's up? Like, you know, nice to meet you. Like, you guys want to do a dab? And everybody was like, what is this? Where did you get this? I was like, oh, I made it. And they're like, what do you mean you made it? I'm like, I made it. They're like, but you're at a class like to learn. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to get better, but I made this. And so I did get a lot better at that class. But what really happened was like, we were there and I spent like all of my money to get there. Like it was one of those things where I was like, I had to pay someone to watch the grow while I was gone. I had to do all this work before I left and all this work afterwards. So it was not even like, it was barely a vacation being in NorCal. I did some cool stuff that made it that way. But you know, like what I didn't have was a bunch of money to buy this award-winning hash from Bird and this other guy, Paul Pesbro, that was there. And so I asked, like I had given everybody dabs and we had smoked and all this type of stuff already. And I asked Bird, I was like, hey man, like he made Jar Tech, like diamonds for the first time. I'd never seen that before. And I was like, dude, I would love to have some of this. I've never smoked anything like this. Like, would you consider trading me for some of this rosin that I brought? And like I had a whole ounce, right? So I was like, would you? And he was like looking at it. I was like, dude, if it's a problem, don't worry about it. It's no pressure, no big deal. And at this point, you know, there's like 30 people in this class that came to learn from an Emerald Cup winning person. And he said to me right in front of him, he's just like, I want to. I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to deal with saying no to everyone else that's going to ask. Like, and it was the funniest thing. But at that moment, like a bunch of those people were like, "Hey, can I buy a gram from you? Like, who are you? What's your name? What's your brand?" Like all of those types of things. And so that was the first kind of point in time where I had like moved from being a grower to being a hash maker and starting to think about like what what do I do with this now? Because people are asking me questions that I'm not prepared for. So I go home. That's in like that was the end of October. I go home. I go back to washing. I take all my new stuff that I learned and I start washing, right? And I'm trying to figure out my hustle and all that type of stuff. And I like finish a bunch of batches. I go home for Christmas, right? And I come back from Christmas. The very next day, I'm at my place working. I'm like taking stuff out of the freezer to bag up to press, and I have stuff out on the table to like make jars and package and stuff because I'm home and I want to deliver orders and all those types of things. And that was the day that the Marshall wildfire happened. And my house was right behind the Costco that you see on the news, went from those time periods of like people fleeing the burning Costco. Well, my house was behind that, and I was with headphones on, like in the lab working, and then like the house was on fire. So like I lost that whole first like cold room setup, that whole thing, a bunch of like rosin and stuff that was there, but like was able to like luckily make it out of that situation and get home and like kind of took inventory of what I had left. And I have a small grow in my apartment that's on my personal Instagram page. That's kind of like all I had ever posted or talked about up until that point was that little this that I still have. It's still running. It's for light garden. Um, and I posted some stuff after the fire was over of me like going back. Like I went back and I took some videos of the house and and there was like like the carcass of my low temp plates press and stuff in there and like my Pelly Pilar like false bottom and things like that. And so I posted it and like people actually started like reaching out to me like, yo, what happened? Are you okay? And so anyway, part of the reason why I'm telling so much of this is that the way that Portal Provisions happened was basically that all these people that had asked me what my brand was basically cleaned me out of any hash that I had left to help me out. And I was trying to buy equipment, and Pelly Pilar replaced all of anything that I had ever bought from Brian. Brian sent me a whole new set of to like get in the lab. And he was the one that asked me, like low temp plates also, I brought them if you've ever seen the video on their page of the restored burned up press, that's mine. But like Brian was like, what's your brand? Like, I'll print it on the jacket for your oh, my cat just jumped up here. I'll print it on your jacket for your wash vessel. You know what I mean? Like we'll get you some cool branded swag. And I didn't have a cold room or a place to work at the time. So I was like, I have an idea. Let me put it together and figure it out. No rush, because my friend, shout out to Johnny Appletrees for letting me post up in his lab and use his Osprey for forever. My friend was letting me work with him and like help him do his work and stuff. So I had a lab to work out of. So Portal Provisions was born because a bunch of people asked me what my brand was, and someone was like, oh, I want to put it on your stuff for you. And it seemed like I needed to figure it out. And then right from that point on, it was Portal Provisions. And I found this artist that I always liked. His name's Dennis K. Wade, or it might be like Dennis Quaid. I don't know how he pronounces it actually, but his name's Benji. And I kind of like told him this whole story and was like, will you make me a logo? And a modified version of that is what's in the background right now. But all of my art on all of my jars is from him based on sharing like that story in my background. And then, yeah, that's kind of like now I have a single source hash maker. That's what I do. I teach classes with my friend Miles, who's been on before, and Jace really is like the main guy behind those nice classes that are based in KNF practices, but they're very different in many ways from what would be considered traditional. And I use that material to make my hash. And that I think is like the most important thing behind my hash. I think up until very recently, like in the last few months, like my hash making was probably even like subpar before I started going to some of those classes. And it was the material that I was washing that made it really good. So,
Yeah, we're gonna kind of get into that a little bit here down the line a little bit because I definitely want to start. I definitely want to talk to you about your growth style and growing specifically for rosin and what that means. But and I also want to make a commentary about how powerful the community is when we can bind together and help each other be successful and help each other do business in a way that I feel is right. So much of our industry and so much of our community has been victimized, I'll say, by predatory investing, predatory lending, people who really don't have the love for our community that we have for each other. And so I think just hearing how, the community reached out to you and helped you get back on your feet and get you where you are now is a very, very powerful and very cool thing. And I think I would like to see that type of stuff kind of take over and overpower some of the bullshit that we're seeing today. So while we're on that subject, go ahead and tell us about the Terp Wars Award, second place, and what you entered and all that good stuff.
sure. So that was Brian from Pele Pilar. I mentioned held an event in LA. That was what 3 weeks ago now, I want to say. And it was a panel judged event. So there was like a technical scorecard. You could get 50 points from each judge. So you had to submit 5 grams of something that you made, and it could be literally any category in the solventless hash category. So melt, rosin jam, cold cure, whatever, fresh press, whatever consistency you want to enter. It turned out some people, like my homie Sean, Quality Squishes, entered like some thumbprint style things, which would be like a rosin gem inside of a cold cure. It's like, there was a bunch of different stuff. And so I got, what's the number, like 216 point something points out of 250. I entered this strain called Blockberry. It's a clone only that's going around. It's called Super Booth, is the name of the cut. Like that's been pretty popular in Colorado lately. It's actually pretty commonly available here, but it's more rare other places. It's kind of like this citrus grapefruit, like has almost like an orange peel rind finish to it. And so that was the one out of my last apartment run, the four light grow that I thought was my best work. And it was a 73 to 159 micron from the first pull, and I did a room temperature cure on it for about a week before I whipped it and got my entry to Brian and entered. And yeah, I got second place in that one. And it was cool. All the people that won were organic, soil grown growers. The guy that won Wigs Wash was also single source. And I know the third place winner, Alabastra, their grower, the homie Daniel down in New Mexico, like they kind of worked, him and the hash maker worked together very closely. So it's like a team. It's very, very similar to like what I would consider single source. In a sense, there are teams like that out there, but yeah, that's what I entered. It was cool to like to do so well in an area that um has pretty high standards for hash. It was fun.
Yeah, very high standards. Very. And so like can you kind of like, I know there's a lot that's gone on in the last, kind of 20 years of hash. We kind of went from kind of like the old school brick hash into bubble hash, and then we started getting into carbon extractions, and then we kind of led up to rosin. So can you kind of maybe touch on a bit about each of those, just kind of like as far as like, how they're made and what goes into making them?
Yes, I will do my best to be accurate. I am 32 years old, so I
Right.
was not even smoking anything, let alone hash, 20 years ago. But I'm really interested in that stuff. So, like, pressed hash is generally from like it can come from Europe or the Middle East. It might have even been from the Middle East by way of Europe. It just depends. But there's a few different kinds. There's like charas that's like hand rubbed that gets pressed down. That's one way that they make it. And then sometimes it's like bubble hash that's actually pressed down. But it changes over time when you press it. It does like kind of ferment. People like Mila the Hash Queen and Frenchie are about stuff like that. And what the now modern version would be is like temple balls, although it's I don't want to call it modern version. It's a very old way, but it's what has persisted through time. We don't necessarily see brick hash anymore, but we do still see temple balls. I still make some. Um, so that was like the first popularized version of hash, or what was like called hashish back in the day by hippies. Um, and then bubble hash was kind of next. Like you said, it was like a simple thing, and it was like considered a kind of like a byproduct. It wasn't high end or expensive, and it wasn't the same as it is now. Where like if you're looking to buy like what a lot of people call 6-star full melt now, like the micron range might be like 90 to 120 or 90 to 104 or 104 to 120. It depends on the hash maker, like true melt. But back then, people were smoking like 25U, and it was like they were like over the moon on some 25U or some 45U, like it was the high end. And then was like the dawn of BHO and those extracts, and it was like the poop soup in the beginning, like not really anything that anyone should really consume, and things that like a lot of people don't talk about now anymore. Like I'm not terribly embarrassed to say that I open blasted BHO. Like I was not dissatisfied with what I was putting out to people. It seemed as responsible as it could at that time.
Yeah,
Um,
same.
as one
Same.
could when you're doing that type of stuff, right? Like I
Right.
said, I had a vacuum oven and all those things. But around the time that all that was going on and like transitioning to closeups was happening, like Nicotine started doing live ice water extraction and calling it like ice water hash here in Colorado. I think like I'm sure there will be dispute about who did it first or whatever, but like that was the first time solventless was ever a thing, like modern, like resin was a thing. And then like I think we got to rosin because I kind of forget who it was, but like somebody got popularized for pressing bubble hash in some parchment paper in a hair straightening iron, and that was on like Hash Church with bubble gum.
Yeah. Yeah,
And like,
I was kind of watching that right as that was all unfolding. They were really getting into terpenes and starting to like know what terpenes were, and they were like dabbing just straight terpenes and stuff. And then all of a sudden they're like, "Hey, bro, you got to get your woman's hair straightener, get some parchment paper, press it out, and you're gonna get hash." And
yeah,
that kind of started that whole thing.
Yeah, and that was
for
like
me anyway.
dabbable hash, right? Like, because at that point, like we hadn't quite figured out like the full melt. Like people weren't doing flags with full melt, like they were putting it on screens and stuff like that. We were still smoking like you smoked the maybe someone had a quartz banger, but like right after it wasn't screaming red hot anymore, you would go in. So you're never getting like flavor off of anything. It was not that was not it. Like and then so then it was like rosin. Now rosin is a thing, right? And then like I don't know who like was first on rosin. Like I'm honestly a little bit fuzzy on the precise history of it, but I do remember that this guy I know, Diet Funk, was like someone who was posting stuff about freeze dryer tech like super early on for bubble hash, and like him and like there was a couple other people in Colorado that were doing it, and like that was when I started remember seeing like really nice rosin. Uh, and like I always liked making hash, and it was not even Diet Funk. It was this dude that I used to know that used to go by the name Geode Gang. That was the first person that I ever pulled up and like smoked a bunch of rosin with. Like not just had any, but like smoked a bunch. He was a hash maker. He had nice class, like all those types of things. And I was like, oh man, I want to do this. Like I miss make like because this was after working in aerospace and all of that, doing the hemp farm. I was like, oh, I want to do this. Like this looks. I miss making hash. Like, I want to do this again. But modern rosin didn't come until like what 20 probably Cool Kids were on it earlier, but it was like 2017, somewhere around there, 2016 maybe.
Yeah.
Like where it started to be a thing that you could like run into and start to find and access like and know about. And then once I had access to rosin, like it was on. That was like the best flavors. Like I wanted to love tasting different flavors and growing different flavors. But what else do we not talk about for the history of hash? Now we have all sorts of crazy stuff like jar tech and mechanical separation and solventless diamonds. Like there was that whole period of BHO where everybody only wanted to smoke diamonds.
I know, I hated that. I thought that was
I,
one of the worst parts of our. I didn't
I
like it.
really liked them. I
I
liked them back then, but
I just hated like trying to like the consistency to make sure that I got every that I got every morsel of hash was an issue. Or when you'd hit the diamond and half of it would go popping off in one direction.
Oh yeah, I've never had that problem, but I've heard about that. That's not quite the thing you want to see. The
No,
Geo
I've
game was
always
on
been into
point
like
back in the day.
the batters and butters and that kind of thing. Or like I still kind of get in. I still get sugar made. I just take fairly fresh out of the oven BHO, shove it in a jar, close the lid, and 5 days later I've got terped out sugar. So that's kind of I'm still old school in that respect. And I kind of want to talk about kind of those barriers of entry for both. I mean, because like for us when we first started open blasting, it was a tube material and some cans of butane. And then it got into closed loop systems and all that tech that went, really extreme. And then now we're into the rosin field of things, and rosin seems to be kind of the go-to. And I know there's varying levels of tech with rosin as well. I pulled up some of the stuff like some of the commercial filtration systems are 30 plus grand. And so can you kind of talk a little bit about the barriers of entry for rosin and what you can kind of get away with and still get really good high quality rosin?
Yeah, I mean, there's really like complex ways to do it, and really not complex ways to do it. And not terribly long ago, like 710 Labs, which is a pretty well-known name in rosin industry, like posted some videos of them doing stuff in trash cans and like with that's fine. like you can wash in the trash can, you can wash in a 5 gallon bucket. Like if you're using food grade plastic, it works. It's not ideal. It's not the best long term solution because it's like not a smooth surface like stainless steel, but like you need a container, you need bags, and you need something to stir with. And technically that's it. But I would tell you that like I've never made hash without a freeze dryer. Um, like I don't know how to properly air dry hash at this point in time. Um, so it's the barriers to entry is like kind of like it's more like what quality do you want to be willing to be able to make? But like that being said, I know there's people that air dry hash and do a great job. Like you don't need a cold room. You can like put like properly store stuff and put it in freezers and wash in the winter. I know one person in particular that fills freezers all summer long and washes in the winter, and he that's how he does it. And so it can be like as complicated or not as you want it to be. Like my friend that let me come down and work in his lab after the fire, um, he has an osprey with the nest, and he's got two presses set up on a low temp plates Medusa head, like where you control both of them at the same time. And like he's got a really cool setup, and I definitely miss it all the time. It's way cooler to press a button and spin up thousands of wet grams than it is to actually hand paddle a barrel that you have to then like jack up and drain through the bottom. But like you can make there's 1,000 different ways to make hash and end up with a quality product at the end. If you look at the best people who would be considered to be the very best hash makers, a lot of them do it similarly but different. Like they all do it their own way. And it's my opinion that a lot of us end up in like a very similar set of places. But when you, it's a lot harder to make really top quality product when you don't have a cold room or you don't have a freeze dryer. Um, there's a lot of information available for you to use those types of tools on the internet, on Instagram, on Reddit, on YouTube, in classes that are relatively accessible. Like back when I first wanted to learn rosin, people were charging other people like that knew each other $10,000 to like hang out and watch and like get all their questions answered and bring a notebook and stuff like that, be able to take pictures, like 10 grand. And I was able to go learn from Bird for $900 plus, you know, my flight and room board and all that stuff, but like $900, right? So like there's a lot of ways that you can do it. And then like there's the little 5 gallon washing machines that are a couple $100. You can get them off Amazon. There's all kinds of videos online how to modify those to use it the same way that Bird and Pesbro and a number of other award-winning hash makers use it. Like, and you can do these things in stages, you know, like you can, there's ways to learn how to manage your water. Like I have a friend in New Mexico who has a rec facility there, and they need like permitting to do a build out on a cold room and all that type of stuff. And so for them, like there's ways that they can set up like a large water reservoir that's insulated and use ice and different things so that they can achieve similar results as to what I can get in a cold room. It just, they have to recirculate. Well, there's like a bunch of different things like technique wise. So as long as you have bags, a wash vessel, and a collection vessel, and some way to dry hash, whether you're doing the pizza box tech in the refrigerator, I think is like the main air dry thing now. I couldn't explain it to you precisely, but like, or you're using a freeze dryer, you'd have to be able to do that. And then your rosin press after that, if you want to make rosin specifically, you will need a rosin press.
And now you've mentioned cold room and the importance of having cold, dry conditions. And one of the aspects of hash that we kind of didn't talk about that kind of reminded me is dry sift. Can you kind of talk a little bit about the difference between the high quality dry sift that you can get versus what you get in the bottom of your trim bin?
Yeah. So the bottom of your trim bin, I guess you could consider that sift, but like to me, dry sift is when you are taking flowers or hash that you could have freeze dried or gotten from the bottom of your trim bin and kind of bouncing it or using static tech to rub it across a set of sized screens. Um, Shout out to the homie Riley for teaching me about this stuff. But they're measured in lines per inch, the screen sizes. And so like what's in the bottom of your trim bin has a ton of plant material and all kinds of other stuff in it that's not hash, even though it kind of looks like hash and gets you more hot than flour. And so you would use dry sift screens, right? Like there would be the one, like if you were starting with flour, the one that you bounced it all on to get the heads off. But then there's multiple sets of screens you can refine them on. You can use your hand or a brush and basically like the static electricity from moving that around on the screens will clean up the hash and separate the contaminants from the hash heads itself. So really, really good dry sift is really, really good. Like can be very high quality full melt hash. Some people with like the best quality starting material have to do dry sift in a cold room in order for it to not just turn to goo on their glove or on their utensils. Um, and yeah, the stuff in your trim bin or like in the bottom of your grinder, like as well, like Keith, traditional Keith, or something that comes from like a Keith box or something like along those lines that gets sold at the dispensary. There's a lot of plant material in there. It's not like some type of pure or clean hash smoking experience. You're not going to be able to finger press that material. Like maybe sometimes in rare occasions it might be super high quality, but it's going to have a lot of specks and contaminants in it. It's not going to turn into a flag or something that you'd want to dab off of a nail by any means. Whereas good, like really high quality dry sift, you could do that.
Yeah, and so the purpose of the cold is just to keep the gland heads from melting and to help them stay in their kind of like truest form.
Yeah, basically. And even if you're like, whether it's fresh frozen or what, like you have volatile terpenes as well that you're trying to preserve. That's why you froze the material in the first place. So if you don't keep it cold, then yeah, like it'll be, the term that gets used is like greasy. Things will start getting greasy. It'll stick to the bags. You won't be able to scoop it out with a spoon or get it off very easy. Um, or in the case of dry sifting, like yeah, it'll stick to your hand or to your brush or wherever and like clump up.
And so can you talk a little bit now that we are kind of on that subject of solventless hash and kind of versus solvent hash? Can you talk about some of the health benefits and some of the overall benefits of having solventless uh, hash versus hash that's made with some sort of solvent?
Yeah, I'll do my best. Like I'm not really a doctor, right? But for me, like the best solventless people will tell you there is no solvent left over. It's clean and all of those things. And like there's lab testing that goes along with it, especially on the rec market that shows that to be the case. Um, almost all CBD oil is solvent extract. Um, and I don't know. As far as consuming it, I don't like consuming it. I don't like the way it feels in my lungs. I personally believe that I can taste the difference, and I would rather not expose myself to potential chemical contamination is kind of how I look at it, especially because like traditional market like especially like whatever is there is being concentrated significantly. There's different ways you can remediate butane or hydrocarbon extracts that some people do leverage, but like I just don't like that stuff. I think about it like food, you know, like I'm gonna go to the me personally, I'm gonna go to the grocery store and buy like organic food. I grow my own vegetables. I buy meat from farmers that raise their own animals in a way that they're not feeding hormones and things like that because that's what I want to consume. It seems to fit and make sense. It's part of why I grow living soil. Also, like it tastes better. That's a whole debate. Shout out Hitman Dougie for causing a ruckus like an idiot. But you know, like health benefits, I don't know, man. Like I love hash. It makes a huge difference in my life for a lot of reasons. But for all I know, in 5 or 10 years or 15 years, when this is all federally legal and we can do medical studies, we might find out that dabbing plant lipids and high terpene content is bad for you. I don't know. Like, I hope not, but I don't know. So I don't know if one is more or less healthy. Like, there's people that are proponents of CO2 that are trying, will try and say that's super healthy, or there's steam distilled extracts. You see that more on the CBD side, but like everyone tries to argue their pieces for what's better for you. But like, I don't know, at the end of the day, we're smoking a bunch of material
Yeah,
and
especially
vaping a
like
bunch of material. So who
especially
knows?
back in the day when we were doing really hot dabs. I know that smoking cannabis, you know, whether it causes cancer or not is one thing, but the heat from smoking will
Burns
pollute
your
your
lungs.
lungs. It'll
I
cause you to
couldn't
have
I
emphysema.
couldn't
So
smoke for months after the fire. I actually ended up in the hospital like for like basically what they called like non-permanent lung damage from the heat and the smoke, like of just in the air, you know, like and so like and then after like when I could kind of smoke again, if someone handed me a hot dab, I'd be wrecked like for a day. Like couldn't even like I couldn't consider consuming again at all. Like so I don't know. Like we'll find out about the health benefits. I think if you're concerned about health benefits, you should eat really clean cannabis that's made from rosin. That's what I think.
yeah,
You should
yeah.
eat it or use suppositories or something like that. Like if health is your like if you really are like and this is no disrespect to anybody like that deals with mental health or something, but if you are an immunocompromised patient and you have like cancer or MS or something, and it actually truly matters what you're consuming, you should know your grower and you should eat what you need, not smoke it.
Yeah, I always recommend that people know their local grower. It's good for everyone. Okay, so now that we've kind of touched on the basis of solventless and solvent and some of the basic setups, I'd kind of like to start talking about growing specifically for rosin and for hash making in general, but especially for washing. I think a lot of people are really interested in what to look for and how to grow specifically for good washes. Can you kind of speak on that?
Yeah, sure. So the most important thing for growing for washing is going to be genetics. Like 100% is genetics. There's a lot of things about resin texture, plant structure, and other things that really contribute to whether or not something, you know, washes well or not. People use the term like dumper or like the percentages are high. Like people talk about getting a 5% yield, things like that. that's very primarily dependent upon genetics. So a lot of people run clone only. It's hard, like you're not going to pop a pack of seeds and have all of them be like all the same wash percentage or something like that. So if you're after production rosin, you got to find some good clones that are known to wash well. There's a ton of strains out there that are like that. Choose something that you like that people that you're working with want to consume. After that, it's mainly, in my opinion, going to be environment. You need to be able to basically, like after week 5, you need to be able to maintain vapor pressure deficit based environment and ride there's tons of charts on the internet that show you it's just the interplay of humidity and temperature that show you where you need to be throughout flower. But at the end of flower, after week 5, like late week 5, early week 6, you need to be able to lower, like not feed CO2 anymore, lower your temperature and your humidity, and then have your nighttime temperatures be a little bit lower. After that, then I would tell most people that there's a few different other podcasts about hash making and that talk about this. There's 2 different hash makers that I can't remember which ones they touch upon this in their episodes, but synthetics do not yield as much flavor and terpene. Like they use the phrase the hash is drier as organics. There's no conclusive evidence on that, and I'm sure 100 people would yell at me and want to argue the difference. But it is my opinion. Like I said, all 3 top spots in that Terp Wars competition were soil grown. That organics is gonna take it every time. And I don't mean some people call it synganics, where it's organic nutrients and cocoa. I mean soil-based, naturally grown cannabis. And the difference is going to be, for anybody who wants to nerd out on it harder, when you feed chelated salts and there's the final molecule in the chain is an O2 versus an O3 or an O, it's just a different type of chemical form that's more bioavailable. The plants no longer self-regulate. They stop creating root exudates, rhizophagy stops happening, and they regulate based on what they are fed. And the plant will do things like nutrient growers talk about pHing their reservoir and all of those things. There's micronutrients that are not bioavailable until they're at a pH of 9. Plant roots self-regulate that at different depths in soil on their own if you don't force feed them. So the expression of flavor and plant health that you can get in a soil-based system is more complex than what you can achieve in a nutrient-based system. And there are some really good new growers out there that make really good rosin. But they're, in my opinion, the exception to the rule, not what is prevalent. And I would argue that most soil-grown hash is good, better than average, just because of that one factor alone, than anything else.
Are there any strains that are out there today that seem to do especially well? We had a question from chat from Tara that asked if there were any specific strains that you that have a reputation for doing well.
Yeah, there's quite a few. GMO is the one that everybody always talks about that has high yields, but ChemD is another one. Cushman's is one. There's this strain called Melted Strawberries. There's a clone only called Dulce de Uva. That super booth that I entered hit 5%. Sour garlic cookies. There's quite a few, but the thing is those are all specific versions of that like super boof is a specific version of blackberry, right? So like you could get a cut of something like that doesn't wash well. It's not the same thing. Um, or like you buy a pack of seeds, like, oh, sour garlic cookies, like nice. Like it's highly likely that you might find one that washes well in there, but not all the sour garlic cookies will wash at 6%, like the one that I had. Um, but yeah, there's the way I would say it is that if there's something that you see in your market, whether it be the traditional market or the rec market, especially the rec market, that everybody has, like GMO or wedding cake or whatever type of rosin, that one probably yields good. Probably yields really good. That's why they're running it in a production facility.
And so with your growing style for rosin, are there specific structures in the flower and structures in the plant or training techniques that you employ to kind of help kind of give you more resin surface area and stuff like that?
Yeah. So like basically like the classes that Jace and myself and Miles teach, the nice classes. Um, there's a system of using Korean natural farming based ferments that especially like the enhanced ripening phase of the nutritive cycle that I believe makes a huge difference in how much resin is produced. When I was still processing other people's grow material, um, that often had the same strains as me, like I knew they were the same clone onlys. I would oftentimes do better on resin percentages for the same ones when like they were running kind of like the build a soil method is the base method that a lot of people get started with, and we even in our system are like, yeah, we buy build a soil 3.0 and that's the soil we start with, and then we add these ferments and these things to it. There's like a whole percentage or more from using this ferment set versus just that methodology, which is actually a lot when you're talking about like 4 to 5. The difference between 4% and 5% yield on a wash is like a really big deal. Same thing, like that's a good return on fresh frozen materials, like 5%. So anything you can do to get an extra percent is definitely going to make a difference. As far as plant training, one thing that I differ in than most people that I hear talking about what makes a good hasher is that I hear a lot of hash makers talking about like, oh, things that have high percentage hash yield are good, open buds that wash easily, finish quickly, all of that type of thing. Like that's good for a hash maker, but not for a grower. Those plants don't yield. I like to measure certain, like my finished plant yields in grams of finished hash per square foot. So like Cushman's is one of my favorite ones to grow. It almost always goes over 5% on the wash. It grows big, dense nuggets, and it's the grower's responsibility, the harvester, whoever that is, to properly break down that material and handle it so that when it ends up in the bag, it's small. Like I clipped the buds at the base of where they meet the stem, and they need to be small, like quarter to nickel sized, so that they yield properly. Because even quote unquote open or more airy bud structures, if you're putting things that are like the size of your fist in your turkey bag for your hash maker to wash, you're basically playing yourself and your hash maker out of money by making the work harder to do. Because if the idea is that we want to open up the buds and get into the middle of it, beating it up with a paddle is not the way to do that. Like you should just physically cut it open, because the physical action of hitting the buds with the paddle is not what separates the trichome. It's like what Bird and Frenchie call like the dual wave action of the trichome head moving against the water current. So like when when you're a kid and you have like a round above ground pool and you walk in a circle with all your friends in one direction and then you switch directions and everybody gets washed away. That's what's happening in the wash bucket when you're creating or in a washing machine, especially it spins one way and then it spins the other. And when it spins the other way, all the material jerks and like almost gets whiplash. But instead of like you getting whiplash, the head just falls off the stalk. You don't want to have to beat the material up more to quote unquote open it up. Like that's just going to give you crappier hash. It's going to have more contaminants in it. So, like, I personally want to do everything that a traditional flower grower or anyone else would do to get as many tops as possible, as many large, thick, dense colas, and grow as many grams of fresh frozen material as I possibly can of those high yielding strains. And then when I harvest, properly break them down so that I will get the best yield when I wash.
And so with you, with your process of presenting your flour to the hash maker, or if you're doing it yourself, you want to try to beat the material up as less as you can because it's going to put chlorophyll and other contaminants in there. But also, is grinding completely something you do not want to do?
No, you don't want to do that. I don't. So like I tell people like if I have someone over to help me harvest, um, I don't touch the buds with my hands. And the reason for that is like the heads themselves, how we talk about being in the cold room and not melting. Like when you touch buds, like it gets sticky, right? Like it sticks to your hands. If you were to like have microscope eyes and zoom in and look at what you were doing on the plant when you touch it with your hand, is you're like melting the trichomes and smushing them together. So what happens when you do that is like we have all these different bags when we're washing hash, like this, you'll hear people call it 70 or 90 or whatever. But the heads that you're trying to get in smoke are somewhere between 45 and 159 microns. If you get a 90 and a 120 next to each other and you touch it with your hand and now it's 180 or 200 microns, it's not going to get into the bag. Like it's going to stay out. You're not going to, like, you won't see it. So you're just losing yields when you do that. The chlorophyll thing is like, I personally don't like to cut across leaves. So if like my hand is a fan leaf, I won't cut the tips of my fingers off because they don't have frost in them on them. I'll just leave it all on there and put it in the bucket because I don't want all of those like open wounds, if you will, to leave chlorophyll into my water. I want my water to be super, super cold and I want to be able to wash it as many cycles as it takes for it to stop yielding trichomes, not as many cycles as I can get in before it all just turns green, which comes from having a bunch of open wounds leaching chlorophyll or beating it too hard with the paddle or spinning it too fast in the washing machine.
Yeah, I think those are kind of pro tips that help a lot. It can help a lot of people get something that's going to look more like what they see when they go to pick up, their rosin from a shop or whatever, for your home presser. And so, what are maybe some other little kind of hints and tips that you could throw in to help people be a little more successful at getting that product that they might see at the dispensary?
As far as like just having a nice homemade product.
Yeah, because a lot of people, we're trying to empower people to take plant medicine and use it in the most efficient way they can, the cheapest way they can, and provide good quality medicine, obviously, for themselves.
I would just tell them to put a bunch of effort in learning from any of the names that I've dropped while I've been talking or coming to one of the next nice classes that I'm teaching or using some type of edge, like, so the difference between a bad hash maker and a good hash maker is not equipment. Like if any hash, like a really good hash maker, if you have like a 5 gallon bucket and some bags, will be able to figure out how to make some good hash. Okay. Like, so learning is the best thing to invest in to get something up that looks like the dispensary. Cause like I said, like I didn't really, when I'm being self-critical, like I didn't really care for my own hash when I first started, but I was a good grower already. So I was lucky, but learning made the difference in like had like same exact setup before I went to California, after I went to California, completely different hash. Completely different. So that's kind of that one thing. And then the the proper harvest handling that I was just talking about makes a huge difference. And water temperature. That's the only other thing. Like figure out how to keep your wash water temperature for sure under 40 degrees. Like for sure under 40 degrees, but ideally no warmer than 35. And there's a number of ways to do that that don't even necessarily include a cold room, but those are the most important things. After that, I would say like understand that it's highly likely that if you're going to air dry your hash, you're going to go through some iterations of learning before you get it right. And that you probably need to buy like a wine cooler or a mini fridge just for that purpose in order to be able to pull it off. But, like the best trick or tip is like to figure out how to save up some money for a freeze dryer, which is not cheap, but like that's gonna next level your process immediately.
Yeah, those are like a few grand. It seems like, right, $2,000 to $3,000, I think. Right.
You can get a home model for pretty cheap. I think sometimes less than 2 grand. The very smallest version of it. But yeah, they're generally not cheap. I just had to buy one. And it was, like $3,500 or something like that.
Right.
Um,
Cool. Well, we had a couple questions come in through chat, so I wanted to jump in with those too. So we had a
sure.
question from the Inside Dope. They asked, "What separates the Great Hash from the Tip Top 6-star stuff?"
So 6 star from Great Hash. Most people would just say it's like the how it melts when you smoke it, and I guess what would contribute to that is mainly genetics, and then like from there, like how delicately it was processed in the hash room and what level of separation work the hash maker has done, because even within a given genetic, like you'll need to figure out which micron range is actually all heads and little to nothing else. And that can be different in each genetic. There's some cool tools from a company called Dynolite that you can use to measure the plant, like on the plant, the head sizes, and guess that more correctly ahead of time. But that's what contributes the most to like what a true tip top 6 star would be considered, is like the cleanliness of the melt for those reasons.
Right. And then we had one last question, basically asking, I can't, kind of in so many words, I think it's kind of asking, what would you recommend people do with their trim? So like, especially if you're just a home grower and maybe they're got trim or anything like that, is there anything that they can do with respect to concentrates or anything you recommend for someone who's like really kind of getting started small?
Yeah, wash your trim, like practice on that for sure. And if you want to have the best result with your trim, like if you're dry trimming, take your trim and put it in an airtight container, bag, whatever, and actually freeze your trim at that point to keep it in a nice unoxidized condition. If you're wet trimming, stop it. But dry your trim, and as soon as it's dry, freeze it, or wet trim it and freeze it immediately. Like either one is acceptable.
Now, just kind of on that subject, when you wet trim, you're exposing more of the chlorophyll contaminant to the product, correct?
Yeah, but like people who wet trim also like it. This is like a whole other conversation about how to cure flower, but like wet trimming is, in my opinion, not the way to get the top quality flower that you want to smoke. I stopped doing that in 2014, when some people showed me the way and helped me understand. So like, yeah, if you're trying to have good quality things, you should do a little bit. It was a long conversation, but you should do a little bit of research as on wet trim versus dry trim, and you should hang some full plants for 7 to 14 days and trim them dry and see if you like the flower better.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I always recommend people to dry trim. And then now you were also talking, another one of the tips and tricks we were kind of talking about is your bags. Can you kind of tell us what kind of range quality wise? Because I know you can spend $600 to $1,500 on bags, or you can spend $200 or $300, or even less, but or $200 or $300 on bags. So where do you kind of stand with bags?
So I have owned like ice extract equipment bags, like what people call the Bugatti bags before. I've had a couple of different things. And at this point, the way I look at bags is that bags are a consumable item. Like you can keep bags really clean and they'll last a pretty long time, but at some point you're gonna need to replace the bags. Okay, first of all. Second of all, I like to have more than one set of bags on hand. Like if you've ever had an issue with a bag in the middle of a wash, like depending on what your system is, like or you're actually lifting bags and like a bag rips on the seam or something like that from too much use or shit, like you actually shake bags if that's part of your washing style. Like there's a number of reasons why you'd want to have more than one set. And so the way I can put it is like I owned Bugatti bags before the fire. And after the fire, it was like I don't have enough money to buy ice extract equipment bags right now, but I could buy some Rosin Evo bags and wash right now. And the other thing is my homie that had the lab that I was working in, he had a bunch of Rosin Evo bags. And when I was bringing my grow material down there and making hash down there was no difference in the quality that I could tell from using the Rosin Evo bags versus the ice extract bags. So now I use all Rosin Evo bags. That's all that I use. And like, an 8-bag Resin Evo set of every micron, because I don't like the 4-bag set. It's not my preferred micron range. It's like $150 for the 5-gallon set. And like that's a reputable brand name. They make a good quality bag. And I have 3 sets. Like, and when I like one of them's brand new, one of them is less used, and one of them is more used. And when the more used one, I don't want to use it anymore, I order another set and I throw it out and I open the one that I already have and another one comes and I throw it in my cold room and it's there and I have it. And same thing with work bags. Like I have more than one work bag. Like if I get a hole in my work bag, like I'm just going to throw it in the garbage. Like, why do I need to have the most expensive? Because here's the other thing is, and like some people talk about this on rosin press bags a little bit, is with like nylon weave bags, as far as like being true to size, quote unquote, with micron range, that's dependent on the shape of the bag. So if the bag moves or stretches, the holes change size. Like I actually want to use my Dynalite to do some more stuff to show this, and I think I want to forget who it was that had if it was like Simply Adam or one of the photography guys that had really good images of bags, because people when they press, they're like, oh, well, let's use stainless mesh, which that's a whole other conversation. But like to avoid bag stretch or to keep the microns of that filter true to size. So without more measuring, I would almost say like, yeah, I don't. In my experience, like you get very similar product from whatever bag. I don't know that I would use really, really cheap off-brand bags from like a grocery store. That's not like a common used name. And no matter what bags you get, wash your bags before you use them.
Excellent. And so we're gonna start winding down towards the end. But I do want you to maybe talk a little bit about the pressing process, temperature wise, and what basic setups people can get press wise and have some success.
I would always recommend people to just get a low temp plates set up, and if you can afford it, like get the BBA hand pump. Um, it the press is the one thing that I will say that if you spend money on a better press, it will directly impact the quality of your product, and if not the end quality, the ease in attaining it. So like the reason why I recommend the BBA pump versus the bottle jack is you can actually feel the feedback from the press with the hydraulic BBA pump, where the bottle jack you can't, and it's much less precise. Your control over how much pressure you're applying, and way easier to have blowouts. So the press is the number, like that's the one area where like prioritizing spending more to me is like worth it. But there's everyone's, you can even get them used, like the low temp plates ones sometimes, like especially the smaller size one where like someone was starting out, they bought one. They're doing a Black Friday sale right now, but like that's kind of the one that I would recommend. I don't like any of the and they're typically more expensive, but I don't like any of the other ones that are like hydraulic controlled or like have a computer program that can control them, like the Pure Pressure or something like that. It just doesn't. It's not. I like to be able to feel it with my hands. It's the way that I prefer. And then you asked about temperatures. I press at 178. My plates are set to 178. It's the temperature that I press at. I never change it. That's what I press at. People in the general world teach or share about pressing at anywhere between like 150 on the low side and as high as like 200 and 225 on the high side. There's things that some of the people that are pressing at higher temperatures are doing as far as pressing like more material. I strongly disagree with either end of the scale. I think that pressing between like 165 and 185 is what's appropriate. If you are pressing dried and cured material, pressing at 200 or higher is possibly necessary or better, depending on a couple other factors. But like I said, I press at 178.
Excellent. That's good. All right. So tell everyone where they can get a hold of Portal Provisions and how they can access you and learn more about you and what you do.
The best way to get a hold of me right now is to access me through Instagram at portal_provisions. The best way to get product is to find me at an event that I advertise on that page, wherever that event maybe. And outside of that, I am teaching classes. We are going to be tentatively at A&M here soon in the spring, or the late winter, early spring, and doing a Denver class as well. It'll be 3 days in Texas and 5 days here in Denver. So look out for the details for that, and you can come spend a lot of time with me and get a lot of specific instruction on growing for rosin and rosin making, and ask every possible question, and then we can even smoke some ash. So
Sweet. And so do you have any of these events you want to talk about that are coming up, as far as like where people can find your product?
yeah, I'll be at Dave's house in Denver for their like Black Friday pop-up event this Friday. At Connoisseur Cup Official is the Instagram for that page, or you can follow me on my page for all the details of how to get to that event. And that's like the only one right now until Adam Dunn figures out his coffee shop license and we do something cool over there. But
Yeah,
That'd be cool.
he is doing some cool stuff, man.
yeah, that when those are going on, I'm always at the Adam. They call them Barter Town or Bar Terp Town. They do it once a month. I'm always at those. You can always
Nice.
find me at that.
Nice. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time and your knowledge. We really appreciate guests who come on and who are willing to answer any questions we have and help people level up. And so I really, really appreciate that. And, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for having me and giving me an opportunity to speak with you guys and maybe help some people learn some stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to Portal Provisions. Thank you to everyone who's been watching live tonight on Cannabis. We appreciate you all. Shout out to Gina. Let's see, we had Grumpy Toad, Psych Doctor just jumped in, the Inside Dope. We had all kinds. Benjamin was here earlier. Shout out to all you guys for hanging out tonight, and others. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/Cannabis. That'll be the best place to keep in touch with us. And then also JR Token and myself will be at the Emerald Cup coming up here in December in Santa Rosa, California. So maybe we'll see you there as well if you're out there. But thanks, Portal Provisions. We hope you have a great night. And everyone have a great Thanksgiving and great rest of your November. Peace, everyone.
Thanks.
One
Bye.
love.